Good morning. Right, we've got an hour together, and in that hour I want to sort of share a few thoughts with you about what's changing and how it's changing, and then I want to sort of talk about how do we respond to that change. And some of you may have been aware that we have an online indicator that allows you to answer 40 questions or 40 choices, multiple choices, and as a consequence of making those choices online in this little app, you get a profile of your attitude to change. Whether you fake it and say you love it, or whether you truly embrace it and look for opportunities to change it is entirely up to you to decide. But this app will give you some insight in terms of your own view of what you think of change. And I'm going to cover some of that near the end. So this is one of those very rare occasions I say if you want to go online and do something else while I'm talking, it seems slightly rude, but I'm encouraging you to go on the app, as Graham has mentioned, and in there you will find, under this first session, a link to that multiple choice questionnaire, and that will take you about 4 or 5 minutes, top whack, to take. So that's the preamble out the way, and do it while I'm talking if you like. Okay, someone once described listening to me was a little bit like drinking through a hose pipe. There'll be an awful lot coming at you very quickly, and I'm happy for you to have this material to consider at your leisure at a more circumspect pace, but I'm going to deliver it in my usual hosepipe fashion because there's so much to cover. So let's think about this changing landscape. The first thing about change is it's constant, and it's been constant back for the last couple of thousand years. Change is always coming at us, and we're just living the little bit of it that we are experiencing, but it seems sometimes chaotic and difficult, but when we finish this, there'll be more coming, so we might as well get used to it. So I suppose the lasting message I want to leave in this keynote session is we just need to get used to change being the constant in our lives and not thinking of change as a project that will come to an end and we can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm afraid that's not going to happen, but we can celebrate success where it happens. Let's think about companies that don't make it, organizations that don't make it economically. Out of the Global Fortune 500, 429 of those companies are no longer with us, and that was formed in 1955. So there is a good evidence that if we don't change and adapt, and this is the evidence behind us, if we don't adapt our models and our thinking and remain relevant to the markets as they move, then simply we do not exist in our current form. We may be absorbed, we may actually go into liquidation, but one way or another things happen to us. And the trick, of course, is to do things to other people and not have the world happen to us. So let's think about the future. And I think last time I used some different examples. I was here a couple of years ago. I used technical examples. I'm using now one of the movies. And here you've got Harry Morris Warner, one of the Warner brothers, saying that who the hell wants to hear people talk? And at the time, of course, silent movies were the norm. And of course, after that, every film that was in production then was reoriented towards talkies. And since then, we've had talkie films all the time, apart from the odd example of where we're deliberately having silent movies. So when a technology happens and when a shift happens, things aren't the same afterwards. We've literally changed the landscape of the way things work going forward. And that's happening to us quite regularly, and we absorb it and move on, and that's going to happen to us increasingly as we move ahead. And one final thought, and it seems appropriate given we've just had breakfast together, tomato ketchup. Here is the bottle, and it's iconic, and the marketers love it. And what's fundamentally wrong with the tomato ketchup bottle? And that's a real question to give me a break, by the way. Well, it doesn't work. I mean, as a delivery vehicle, it doesn't work. If you remember, there was an advert once where you go slap, 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 and make a benefit out of a miserable design feature that the stuff didn't come out. Well, of course, it's the wrong way up, as Graham says. What you've done is turn the bottle over. And if you look at it carefully, all you see they've done is give us a clue. Having put a flat lid on it, they've turned the label over. And that took from 1872 and 130 years to turn the bottle over to make it easy for us to use. And the point of this isn't to poke fun at Heinz, because they're delightful and lovely people, and I work with them occasionally. But it's the fact that even if you take no notice of what I have to say to you today whatsoever, if you go back to your office in your company, you will find that you have your version of tomato ketchup bottles. There are things you're doing that in a while you'll think you are barking mad and you've been doing it for a long time. Normally it's your billing systems for your clients because it drives them nuts. But it could be anything you're doing. Think of it with fresh eyes and you may see the way ahead. So what's changing all around us? Of course, globalization is hollowing out the way the world works. Work itself is changing, and I want to concentrate on that a bit. We've got demographics, we're living longer. We've got population of Generation Y taking up the majority of workplaces in the next decade. Technology is changing and morphing and affecting what we do and where we do it and how we do it in so many places. Consumers are looking at their buying patterns in completely different ways, and their interaction with companies are changing dramatically. And of course, the built environment and the climate change is having a huge impact on our agendas. So massive change. If we just sat and talked about this for a moment, it would be a huge agenda of change that we're going to deal with. Add to that the likelihood of things happening that are unpredictable but have huge impact, i.e. black swans or wild cards. All of these ideas are the low probability, high impact events are out there waiting to happen. And occasionally they do happen, whether it be a volcano, a solar flare that wipes out our electronics, or it's a pandemic. Maybe it was going to be SARS or avian flu. Maybe it's Ebola, but we are overdue, and I'm not suggesting we want one, far from it, but it is not unlikely that this sort of thing will overtake us at some point. So how do we prepare for wild cards in our thinking, in our strategy? They are too big to factor in partially, and they have too much impact, but nonetheless they're worthwhile camping on and thinking about. And in fact, it was the Pope recently said, are we already in the Third World War, if you add together what's happening all around the world? And I'm not going to dwell on that, that would be a little bit depressing, but as you know, there's an awful lot of conflict going on in the world right now. So, wild cards, we're not going to talk more about them because there's not a lot we can do about them, but we need to have some view of what we would do if some of these things happened. So, global change. Let's have a think about that for a few minutes, then I want to get to what do we feel about all this change in just a few minutes. So, huge amounts of growth in the world economy, probably about 3 times the world current GDP in the next 4 decades, huge growth in the world's economic activity, 70% of which is going to come from emerging countries, and an enormous amount of our insurance industry, additional premium, is going to come from Asia and the APAC region in particular. So again, we're reorienting where our growth markets are, and therefore where our energies and activities are going, and the languages and the cultural behaviours and the regulation, etc. And you've really got some interesting dynamics going on as the Asian region is becoming more of a homogeneous regulatory environment and is thinking to work together. You can see the potential for that becoming an area of interest for an awful lot of players when hitherto it hasn't been. I was in the Philippines 2 weeks ago, and they are really excited about the potential for their area. The Philippines has the fastest growing income per capita forecast for the next 2 decades. So in terms of momentum and velocity, you've got markets which are really exciting, although they're coming from a very low base. And of course, China could develop to be the number 2 insurance market in the next few years. And it won't do things the same way that we've done them. There'll be different products in different ways. So the view is that insurers are going to look very differently across the world as we see these emerging markets start to impact the type of product and the type of service that is demanded. So that's the globe done in a few moments. Let's think of Africa. Africa is the unsung hero of world economic growth. 6 out of 10 largest economies in the world, or fastest growing economies in the world, are from Africa. Africa is a place rich with resources. We know that certain countries are buying up those resources, but that's not the exciting story. The exciting story is it's bandit country for growth. It's the unregulated, explosive growth markets are happening in Africa. And increasingly, the middle-class consumption patterns will show that Africa is one of the fastest growing areas. If you think about it now, we've got a third of a billion people who are essentially middle class, and we're moving to 1 billion in just the next 4 or 5 decades. So that's a huge change in the number of people who are going to want to protect products and services and lives in their environment, which today don't do at all. So from an insurance perspective, it's a major opportunity, an incredibly high-risk environment, an incredibly high-risk place to have in your supply chain and your distribution chain. So really challenging, but great opportunities. What does that lead to? All these people we're going to have in the world that are being born and staying alive and growing in economic activity are going to demand more infrastructure. So you can see here, air passenger likely to double, treble the amount of freight, or even quadruple the amount of port handling, or not. I'll cover the or not bit in a minute, because if you just take what's happening now and use history to predict what will happen in the future, then we can go badly wrong. And this is one of those wonderful occasions where if we just say the way the world's configured for manufacturing and distribution of all sorts of products and services stays the same, then this will happen. If we change the way that works, then this may never materialize. And this is why it's quite interesting when you look forward to think of what other ways do we have of distributing, manufacturing, and supply of products and services. This is just a quick glimpse at the likely growth in terms of middle-class people to shoot at in the world. And by shoot at, I mean target for sales, not with bullets. That's the wrong impression. So here we have Asia-Pac is an explosive growth market, and you can see Africa, by comparison, is tiny, but it's growing rapidly. And you can see Europe is pretty static. So in terms of the growth potential, you're taking money out of some other supplier competitors' hands if you want to grow. If you want to grow, we've got to go somewhere else to get that new money. Okay, right. What else is happening? Okay, we're aging, and those of you in the life and the health industry are dwelling on this an enormous amount. But what you're getting is a situation where the over 60s will be a third of the population in mature economies in the next 30, 40 years. And basically that's us in this room. We're going to be part of a world where a third of the population's over 60, and the fastest growing cohort in many developed economies is the plus 85s. And that's likely to increase to be the over plus 90s. So increasingly we are getting older, and maybe, may I say it, slower. So how are we going to get around in our cars? How are we going to get around supermarkets? How are we going to get around anywhere? It's going to be quite challenging. And we have 3 and 4 generations, maybe even 5 generation workforces with different icons and cultural norms and behaviors and preferences for technology. It's going to be chaos, but huge fun chaos, yeah? I thought I'd better stop and see if you're okay out there. I know it's early morning and all that, and this is just the preamble. This is the introduction bit, okay? We haven't really got into it yet. So, okay, massively older populations, we know all that, and that's not standing still. The forecasts are that, of course, increasingly, aging will be cured, and therefore there will be no aging. And we can have a great debate. If you're an actuary in the room, debate with me afterwards. I'm happy to have that discussion. It's really interesting of the science and discovery and remedy and awareness for health and life extension and the potential of that coming together over the next 20, 30 years that will give us the potential to cancel out aging effectively for at least the wealthiest cohort, and that's pretty much the way it's likely to work, first of all, in the world. And then life gets very interesting when we start chatting up somebody in the bar and you think they're 20 and it turns out they're 140. So there's going to be some really interesting challenges and even some routes to aging. Some folk believe we can dial back the physical look of aging, and that's, of course, the holy grail of the beautician marketplace. So it's really interesting what's happening there. Or, of course, the other way is we're not all the right shape, we're not all the right fitness, and we're not getting well, and we're going to die younger of all sorts of nasty things. So the haves can live to 130, 180, 200, 300, some would even say 500, and the have-nots maybe are the unhealthy generation who have been brought up on fast food and little activity and sitting in front of screens, increasingly at risk of dying very young of some rather unfortunate things. So we've got a very polarized potential amongst our society, in the developed world at least, where we're going to see increasingly haves and have-nots around life and life extension and life expectancy. And of course, all of our gadgets and devices are gearing towards helping us know how well we are as we go forwards. We've got Google contact lenses measuring our blood sugar. We've got avatars asking us if we've taken our medicine. You can have e-tattoos, which are giving you all sorts of treatments. We've got 3D printing allowing us to replicate parts of our bodies, and that's already happening. And all manner of devices and technology and thinking that, as I say, is going to impact our potential life expectancy. So we've been forecasting for years that most insurers would want to get out of annuities, because guessing how long someone will live is a huge problem for the industry. So the other side of the coin, of course, is that if you have got programs that can use any of that technology and that thinking to help companies to keep its personnel fitter longer, then you've got a real competitive advantage to offer to your talent. Come work for us and you live longer. Pretty cool? Well, who knows? I mean, Sprint have made their head office inconvenient. You have to walk everywhere, up and down the stairs, long way to the photocopier. Car parks are minimum of a quarter of a mile away, so that people are fitter because they walk around more in the building. and use the elevators less, and they use other forms of convenience less often because they want the physical productivity of the folk to be maintained. So if we have a healthy workforce, we tend to be more productive. It's a win-win for everybody. So differentiation around wellness programs inside corporations is pretty likely to be a strong winner as a play in the future. So let's just talk about tech. We've just got into tech a little bit, and I want to talk a bit about technology because it's quite an interesting area, I think at least, where we're getting a lot of change. So first of all, the view is that technology is pretty much likely to trump almost everything else that's happening, whether it's capital, whether it's regulation, whether it's growth of the middle class in different parts of the world. The use of technology and the opportunities it gives us to do things differently and in different ways is huge. Across many, many markets, we're seeing the potential for complete revolutionization of the business model and the proposition for clients. So big change. So let's think about technology in a different way for a change. Let's think of it in terms of 3 horizons. If you're a marketer out there, you'll know that this is a traditional marketing approach, and we've applied it now to looking at technology. So Horizon 1 is the technology that's around now today, and if you like, that's our core technology. Horizon 2 is the new stuff that we know about. It's out, it's been launched, it's released, we're working towards using it and embracing it. And if you like, Horizon 3 is the stuff that's out there that people like me turn up and tell you about that really is of little interest because it isn't available yet. We don't know when it's coming. We don't know exactly what it'll turn up like, but it's on the way, and we get a sort of inkling that it's coming. And we need people who are managers to look after today's programs, today's technology, today's business processes. Clearly, we need leaders to take us towards the next area of technology and change. And people who think differently, we need entrepreneurs in our organizations to think differently about how those technologies can genuinely allow us to do things differently. And if you just dwell on that for a moment, if we truly look at a new technology or an emerging technology and say, what could we genuinely do differently, then you have a sustainable advantage probably over 90% of your competitors. Because mostly with technology, we play catch-up. And I'm not suggesting we suddenly rush towards the bleeding edge and start taking on things before they're tested or proven, but at least think, what might we do fundamentally different with our distribution, with our partners, with our IT and software partners? What might we consider that we could do differently in 5 or 10 years' time? Think about that as a time frame for a conversation. Is it worth one day a year just thinking what you might do 5 or 10 years differently out if you just use your technology differently or you embrace the way you work with your partners and suppliers differently? It might actually throw up some rather interesting opportunities for a lot of firms. And the reason this is important is because we don't have to wait until each of these new waves is mature until we get to a point of greatest confusion. And the confusion kicks in when we start believing that all 3 of those waves of technology will coexist in some form or another. And that's not that far out. So if I give you an example, if you take Apple in 2008, then they had the iPod, it was their staple product. Never mind the PC and all that stuff, but just take the handset type devices. What had just come out was the first iPhone, and the first iPad was 2 years away. So it wasn't even they weren't even thinking about what that would do. And if you think about that progression, it's completely changed a mass of ways that companies and organizations embrace the use of these sort of mobile tools. Many applications being developed for these sort of platforms. And I'm not saying tablets weren't around before, because they were around 20 years before the iPad, but the iPad brought the tablet of age, if you like, in terms of corporate tools and credibility and delivery of applications and a clean interface and all the other things we know that it brought. So this simple one example shows you that actually it's very easy to see that it's probably worthwhile looking out a bit further. Because we may have been able to ignore the mobile phone in terms of a device for delivering products and services in developed markets, but probably can't ignore tablets, which are much more like PC screens that people keep in their bags. So, really interesting way of looking at things. So, let's look at Horizon 1. Horizon 1, we are all dealing with these technologies today in our organizations. Of course, we're looking at mobile, the consumerization of IT, i.e. outsourcing IT to our staff, big data, analytics, predictive, prescriptive analytics, social media, moving away from just being a marketing tool to being a customer services tool, to being an internal project tool, to being the tool to run the company on. Internet of Things, completely changing the M2M machine information we get from the whole world about and how we connect with our customers and the environments they're in, and telematics is the deliverable of that. Wearables, creeping up on the agenda, watches, devices that we can pin on, clip on, run with, interact with one way or the other. Artificial intelligence has been forecast for a couple of decades to gradually start to automate managerial work and now professional work, some decision making. And augmented reality is allowing us to start thinking in a practical way about how you can use tools like Google Glass or Glass and these sorts of head-up displays that we currently have available to us. And then avatars, how do we replace human beings with animated images of people acting on information that we keep in our databases and deliver to customers. So we're doing all that today, yeah? This is your turn to respond. That's all on your agenda. Every one of those things should already be on your agenda with something you're doing about every one of those things. And that's enough, isn't it? Should we just pack up now and have coffee? But the whole point is, that's not it, is it? There's more coming. So then we've got holographics, which is really interesting because it disembodies bits of technology from the thing we want to interact with, and 3D printing will come of age, the fabrication side of the manufacturing world. Automation of everything that's got a machine or a brain in it, in one way or the other. Unmanned autonomous vehicles, of course, they can be planes, trains, you name it. Cognitive computing. I mean, I'm not going to go through all these in fine detail, but there are a whole range of new technologies, and this is just some of them that will impact the insurance industry in particular, and those acting with the insurance industry. Of course they are, because they're a continuum of what we've already done in the past. So we will obviously embrace these forms of technology because they give us more productivity, more engagement, more connectivity. So, what about Horizon 3? Right, quantum computing. So we're now moving from to the potential where one machine, the size of a PC today, if you like to use old vernacular, will contain the computing power of the entire population of the planet Earth for every human being. So we've got amazing computational power to go with amazing amount of data coming from the Internet of Things. If you push those two together, what do you get? You get something really quite different and quite interesting. Smart dust. We've already got a version of smart dust, but smart dust is really quite cool. In terms of it's the size of a grain of sugar, it's got a power source, it's got a camera, it's got a GPS locator in it, and wherever it is, it'll take a picture of what it is and tell you what the conditions are around it. And they're trying to make it smaller than a grain of a piece of sugar right now. So really interesting. Prosthetics that actually have intelligence that are linked to the human beings, brain-to-brain interfaces, which are already beginning to work. Microscale 3D printing, where we can actually print the vein, the vascular system inside the organs that we now can already print today. But in the next 10 years or so, we'll be able to print the vascular system to allow those organs to live. And therefore, bodily transplants of 3D printed organs from our own biomass, which reduce the amount of potential for rejection, allows us to live longer if we can keep printing new bits. Maybe even print them at home. I'm not feeling very well, I'm going to print a new 3D kidney. My heart's a bit weak today, I'll print a new heart. Now the problem, of course, is installation. We're still going to have a few issues about how do you get these things in place. Okay, we've got to get over that, but once we get over that, then we can replace ourselves faster. Even the body replaces all our parts. And that's the problem. The body replaces parts as we get older with parts that aren't quite as good as the last one. If any of you are getting on in years, you'll know that's true. And that's really quite annoying. So if we have this approach, we can put a new bit back in. And how better will we feel because of that? So therefore, how long will you live if you can do that on a mass basis for the population? So, quite interesting. So there we are. That's three waves of technology. And in the next 5-6 years, you'll be dealing with all of those and a lot more. So that's just a few of the ones I've picked. So if we've got any CIOs in the room, and the CIO has one of the hardest jobs, not least of all that they're competing with the CMO in terms of spend, of IT spend, competing with the CDO, the Chief Digital Officer, competing with the Chief Strategic Information Officer. The game's afoot about who is in charge of IT in our firms. There is too much of it in too many areas that are too new for it to remain in the hands of the infrastructure folk. And if the CIO tends to dominate the infrastructure space, and even if that's outsourced, What is the purpose of the CIO? And that's a big challenge for a lot of organizations now. There's a huge conversation going on is, what is the role of the CIO? Who is in charge of IT? What sort of characteristics do you want in your CIO or your leader of IT in the future? In fact, we're now seeing some startups saying, we don't want a CIO. Technology is too important to have an individual on the board responsible for it. Every member of the board has got to be responsible for IT. And as an example, that's Metro Bank in the UK that started. If you talk to Craig Donaldson, he says, I don't want a CIO, it's too important. We've got to make decisions, we've got to understand it. So there's a secondary issue there is, if we're leaders of companies, it's now no longer good enough to say, CIO, he looks after technology. We've got to know it intimately and understand the implications for our organizations. So take social media, for example. I very often go around companies and talk to the most senior people, and social media is something for the kids, which is quite frightening when I get that response. It's Twitter and Facebook and kids chatting to each other, or it's for the marketing department to get our message out there. We're tweeting, we've got Facebook. Oh yeah, customer services are using it to get feedback from our customers and handle complaints and manage the market. And that's as far as it's going for an awful lot of people. We need to understand that social media for some people is the communication tool. Many universities no longer give emails to people. So when that smart talent comes into your firm and they're given an email address, they think you're out of the ark. Why are we going back to this linear, non-conformant form of communication we've put up with for 30 years when I can have a much more connected experience in my social world, inviting people to collaborate around issues that I want resolving? Or in fact, we use that to pool risk, and we allow people to gather together a cohort of friends or contacts that will pool risk together for housing or for commercial or for any other form of insurance, and protect our own exposure to claims inflation and fraud by simply managing the network and having an open strategy for sharing claims and payments, and therefore reducing that part of the cost to us. Really interesting dynamic, and we're now seeing that come to pass in Frensurance in Germany as a first example, I'm sure, of many where the insurer is now put in the position of administrator, not gatherer of pool to share risk. So, one small dynamic, social, changing what we do and how we do it. Let's think about mobile. Mobile, I think I've maybe mentioned this to some of you before, that mobile is tending towards zero as a cost. Now, you wouldn't believe that with every launch of a new Apple iPad. That's because they command a premium price. But elsewhere in the market, it's tending towards zero. So if you think about the Arcash tablet, it's pretty much like a modern iPad in terms of its capabilities and speed. And they're being given away by the Indian government to students at university to bring up their capabilities and access to technology. So that's the Arcash tablet, about $35 US. FT last year started giving tablets away. You can have a free Nexus if you take a subscription. And of course, this is the way technology's often gone. We want people to engage with our annuity service, and therefore we'll give away the transport layer when it's tending towards zero. So these sorts of technologies, as they become mature, as they become mass market, as the costs are reduced, as the performance increases, they tend towards zero, and then they're given away. And we've seen that here now. And of course, now we're seeing wearables as a new form of mobile. And these sort of clip-on, strap-on, bendable devices are all out there over the next couple of years. We're going to have the most amazing devices that we can wear anywhere you like, or have tattooed on us, or have your skin mapped for the keyboard, which is already possible, by the way. Very accurate way of using a keyboard, the back of your hand. So there's lots of things we can do in terms of making technology gradually disappear from view. And of course, we're now seeing things like laptops and tablets blending. You've now got these scrollables, which are coming out, which are completely bendable screens. The largest bendable screen is a 60-inch screen that Samsung have put together. So you can roll your television up and take it with you. I mean, why would you want to do that? It's slightly beyond me, but you'll be able to pick up the TV. I've got a big TV here. You just pick it up, roll it up, and take it out the room. So very mobile, very accessible, even very large, you might say. So changing dramatically. And of course, it's not just sitting there making phone calls and the such like, because that's well past its main purpose. It's monitoring what's going on around you and who's there, and it's monitoring the environment as far as it can in terms of conditions because it knows where you are, it knows what the weather is outside, it knows what you're experiencing. So it's doing a lot more than just simply acting as a communications device, and of course so much is being attached to it to monitor our health. So let's think about the mobile in a consumer context for a moment. It's sort of where am I, what am I doing, and who's around me that could help me or make my life more successful, and how are they going to help me? And if you think about that, here we are in this lovely hotel. It knows that because of GPS. If you've given your GPS, your device, access to your diary, that can be transmitted as well to your trusted partners, and it knows who's around you because you're all sitting there polling like crazy with your mobile devices, saying who you are, and you're very static, so you're likely to be at a meeting. You've got people from the same industry, so all sorts of decisions can be made outside this room about what sort of communication you should be sent in this sort of context. And of course, it's going to be really interesting in the future as we sell more insurance, for example, over mobile devices. Then the next mis-selling scandal will be you should have known the cohort of people around me were my mates and friends, my rugby mates. This was not an appropriate moment to ask me to make a decision on life insurance. What are you going to do about that? So we're going to need to track who we are selling to and where were they and what were they doing and who was around them and was it a reasonable time to make proposals, because the regulator knows this as much as you know it. So we're going to have a really interesting tussle over the next few years as we do that. And why are we going to give our mobile devices access to our diary to transmit outside so others know what we're doing next? Are you going to do that? How many of you want to share your diary with anybody who wants to see it? For the record, there's a gentleman over there. Okay, we're not really very keen on it. Think about smart cities. As increasingly we urbanize, as increasingly we condense our economic and social activity together, we need to put on more transport systems and infrastructure that meets our needs. And increasingly, city managers are looking for you to tell them when you are going somewhere next. Now, for example, if you get priority access to the subway system or to the next bus coming along because you've shared your diary with the public transport system that's decided we need to put on a second bus and you're one of the people allowed on it because you've shared your diary, how much will you be motivated to share your diary? It's going to happen, because that's the way we need to manage our bigger cities. We need to know what you're doing, where you're going next, and we need to help you get there. So we will share our diary. Then what happens then? Do they share that with somebody else ultimately? I don't want to be cynical, but that's the way it goes, isn't it? We start off saying it's a closed loop, and then you've got people like the European Commission who are determined that every public body in the whole of the European Union shares every bit of information they've got so that people can build applications that are innovative and help the whole of the EU be more productive, and that's how that information gets out into the public domain. And that's what they're doing and have been pushing for a number of years. And I quite enjoy chairing those sessions when we try and help countries think differently about the data they've got and how to share it. So there's a little bit about mobile. Also, of course, it knows where you are. It sort of can guess what you're going to do, and we can start making offers. How many of you work in organizations that make offers of daily insurance to people today? Okay, well, it's happening. So if you're near a ski resort, you've been traveling towards it, and you haven't got any ski insurance as far as I can tell, then you might get an offer of a $4 ski insurance because that's what you're about to go and do. And how much more might I say yes to that, just for convenience, because I'm heading towards the slopes? So lots of really interesting ways of delivering traditional product. But how about if we move from just offering people the potential for protection and say, we're going to now warn you of risk. So you are my customer, you're in your car, I'm covering you on mobile insurance, and I've got a head-up display in that car. I can interpret the information coming from it and start putting up warnings about risk situations developing in front of you. So now I'm preventing you from having an incident in the first place. So you're reducing the peril for your base, reducing the claims, hopefully making you more profitable, but even more important, helping the customer lead a more successful life. Now that's a really interesting positioning. So it's not just about protection. We're now interacting with our customers on a very regular basis, maybe 4 or 5 times an hour, maybe 4 or 5 times a minute if they're driving in the middle of a city, or alerting them to what could damage their world and their very existence, if you like. Obviously, you couldn't go mad on the screen. They've got to be able to see out of it. But nonetheless, head-up display, warning people of situations that are developing are going to be really interesting. And the same for pedestrians walking down streets that are dangerous. Mobile also, of course, is going to monitor every sort of bodily function to know how well we are. In the future, when someone says to you, how are you? You'll say 87. Last week I was 86, but I've been working hard at it. I'm 87 this week. My forecast will be 82 in 3 weeks, so I've got to do something about that. So all sorts of mechanics that we're going to attach to ourselves to know how well we are. Interesting enough, when we gradually release access to investments over the years, people have tracked it daily. If you look at the day trading on shares, it's minute-by-minute trading, isn't it? What was really interesting in the States when the first 401ks were made available for viewing online in terms of their performance, people were checking 401ks, which are pension pots, every day. And these are 20-year investments. So you give people the chance to monitor something, and we love it. So if you want to give people the opportunity of really easily monitoring their health, how much more we would do that? If it was easy just to flip on an app and know how well you were, how often would you do it? Once a year? Month? Weekly? Daily? Twice a day? Every time you got a few minutes? Put it on your main page when you open up. Have it send you texts and tweets and heaven knows what else. You're not well. Do something about it. Well, of course, we're going to outsource that, and we'll send that information to somebody else, and they'll decide you're not well, and they'll come and tell you you're not well, and they'll come and bring a remedy, hopefully. So all of that becomes really interesting the more we're plugged in terms of how well we are. And of course, these devices, which we're increasingly over this decade going to clip on to all over the place, are going to disappear in smart cloth. I don't know if you've been exposed to smart cloth. It's just unbelievable in terms of what it can do in picking up all sorts of measures of physical performance, whether it be anxiety or heartbeat or sweat or, pardon the expression, but that's just the way it is. All sorts of things that can be done using these sorts of cloths. That means that technology actually disappears, and we don't even know, if you like, we're wearing it, and yet it's monitoring how well we are. So if you're in health or wellness or life industry, these things are going to be tremendous aids. I mean, for those of you in the life industry, you want people to last forever and never die, and people in the health industry want you to die very quickly. So, these sorts of things will have different motivations, but nonetheless, we'll be using these a great deal. And of course, the telematics world we're already into is going to be awash with all sorts of really interesting personal information, as well as material information from the physical world. So if you think about this, every piece of road furniture in the world is going to have an IP address. Only about 0.4% of things in the world so far have got an IP in them at all, IP address. Philips are working on light bulbs that every light bulb will have an IP address. And every street light will have a camera and an IP address. And it can detect Class A drugs in your pocket as well. So the sort of things that are being put in our street furniture will monitor social behavior, individual behavior, can track individuals, whether that's good or bad. We can have a debate about that. But nonetheless, the ability to identify people, to target police resources, which, by the way, is incredibly effective in studies that have been done to target police resources on suspects. But these sensors are going to be absolutely everywhere. And this is like another internet explosion, if you like. If the internet has transformed what we do to one extent as thinking human beings, the machine-to-machine world of sensors is going to completely transform the sort of information we're going to have about anything. So if you insure buildings, when you take on your client, you can wash that building in 200 or 300 sensors and know everything about that building in terms of doors open and overheating boilers and leaking water and you name it. And you can, in concert with your clients, reduce peril and risk and therefore make their life better at the same time as responding to disaster earlier, hopefully, and maybe even moving into that preventative role. So huge change coming. Right, that's a little bit about how we're going to get more information. Yeah, we could have huge fun with that all day because that's the tip of the iceberg. The other side of the coin is what do we do with it? So if you think about this mountain of information, I mean, at the moment most of us will use business intelligence, yeah? Many of us will use predictive analytics because that gives us a potential to forecast what might happen soon. And of course, we move on to prescriptive, which is giving us a possibly near real-time view of what we might need to do about those outcomes. And that really becomes quite interesting if you hook that up to animated avatars who are interacting with your customers or your distribution channel, your brokers or your dealers or your supply chain in one way or the other, you've got a completely auditable communication with the field using data that's reliable in a humanoid way that's picking up the facial expression change of your customer and adapting what's being said and how it's being said, and picking up tone of voice, and you're capturing all of that information to store about that transaction, and you know exactly how someone was feeling and whether they were under stress or whether they were comfortable with the propositions you were being put forward. So animated avatars are going to change everything. Then, of course, it becomes haptic and holographic screens are exciting. They're coming in the next few years because we'll have color interactive holograms. And of course, eventually you have a sort of a holographic haptic interface where you can touch and feel your call agent. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But if we limit it to shaking hands or maybe some of the more commercial, acceptable business-like type transactions, it could be a really interesting way of technology morphing to be more human-like. And the one thing we know about technology is every time it moves one step closer to being more human-like, either the interface or the way it's configured or the use of it. Take when Apple, or was it Xerox? Let's have a debate. When icons first came out, we had a change in the way we interface with our computers. A load more people were able to interact with them, and increasingly as we move into voice, Siri-like, if you like, and other more human interactions like Samsung's eye movement or hand and gesture movement, more people will be able to interact. And if the other side of the coin is your interface looks like this, it might change how we interact with our PCs for many people, including many older people, of course, because it's a very human experience. So 3D virtual reality comes, and that's the next stage. And here we have two interesting scenarios. We have a scenario at the top, which is the 3D world comes into the office. So you can paint any wall you like with an interactive display of products and services, and using QR codes, order and buy and interact. So outside comes inside, if you like. This was from a picture of an underground station in South Korea where Tesco's, who are operating there, put up interactive walls of products, and people could order those products in the tube station, and when they got home, those goods had already been delivered. And this, of course, been put up in any office. So the outside world comes into the office. Equally, the other image partway down is a 3D virtual world where we go in and get fully immersed in those worlds, and we interact with people as if they are next to us. And we can go for a walk with our client around their plant, around their circumstances, around their car, around the cause of their accident, around the impact of the issue you had. And those worlds are becoming more real. I mean, how many of you have got activity in 3D virtual worlds? It's interesting. If you remember a few years ago, Second Life and all the hype around those third 3D worlds, well, you get the trough of disillusionment in every tech, yeah? You get the hype and the early adopters. You get the trough of disillusionment, which is what we're in now. We don't believe that'll be of any impact whatsoever. And then, of course, we have growth. So, I can forecast to you that in the next few years, through a whole bunch of drivers, including the fact that a lot of young people have grown up on massively online reality games and are used to interacting in these spaces, we are going to increasingly want to work in a faster, more productive, more personal way with people, and we will increasingly want to go online using all sorts of devices and glasses to get into those worlds and chat to people, because it's more human-like to go for a chat with someone and have a walk at the same time. And you might want to go to, you might want to go to the library in Oman and have your chat and walk around there. You might want to go on a canoe ride down the Amazon while you're chatting to your client. I don't know. That's the problem. The imagination is going to be huge. Whatever it is you think is relevant to go and bring as a context for your discussion. Of course, the first things we're getting to is augmented reality, head-up displays. The army have had them for years. The construction industry's had them for 20 years. And now, of course, they're leaking into our understanding, but through Google Glass with a camera and a head-up display. And they're driven by a Siri-like voice command system. So they're very different to mobile devices. And this is why you can see that before too long, either that or contact lenses or other forms of embedded devices will gradually move us away from wanting to carry around a mobile device that takes a hand. I need a hand to hold this thing. and eventually that's going to go and become a watch, and then it disappears completely, and maybe it's a head-up display of some sort or another. Then you get new language creep in, don't you? Apparently, if you wear Google Glass in the wrong social setting, you're called a glasshole. And now we've got, in some parts of the world, glass wars, because some people are the haves and the have-nots. The haves have got the Google Glass, and the have-nots don't have Google Glass, and they're being mugged and beaten up in the street. One of the interesting things about Google Glass right now, which is a slight problem, is you can't personalize them. So once they're stolen, they're completely available to be sold to somebody else and fully usable. So it's really interesting in terms of the little wrinkles that are being sorted out as these go mainstream. So head-up displays, embedded 3D worlds, 3D worlds coming into the physical world is going to change accessibility of information, access to products and services, and new ways of communicating. And what you get is an example like this. I love this one. This is in a water park in Tel Aviv, and this is somebody sliding down the slide. And as they go down, the wristband they got when they put their clothes in the locker is registered to their Facebook account. And when they go past, if they like that ride, they click it as they go past, and that updates their Facebook status real time. And that's the speed you need to get customer feedback. Okay, so this is the example of that. It's not just to have fun. That's the speed you get customer feedback. The nice thing about insurance companies is they pay most of the claims. So most people are happiest at the moment you tell them you're going to pay it, or the moment they get the check. There is a moment of extreme happiness. That's your slide moment. You need to get people to tell you how wonderful you are so we can persuade the world that insurance is a good thing. Because right now, most people think that insurance is a bad thing. They know they need it. When you ask people to consider it, they say, yes, of course we need it. Of course I trust insurers. But in terms of emotional connection, we have a long way to go. So this is a great way of getting people to say, fabulous experience, or if it was, and paid out as they said they would do, because most of you have unbelievable processes and systems that deliver the claims to the customer when you say it will, for most of the time. So good record, we need to capture that to share with people. Then you've got 3D printing. 3D printing is an extension of the fabrication, the prototyping fabrication world that manufacturing's been in for many years, and it's increasingly going to move towards making finished products. So you've got Airbus saying we're going to make aeroplanes using fabricators. You've now got concrete fabricators, with the largest printer out of concrete is 5.5 meters by 5.5 meters by 3.5 meters. So you can print very large concrete structures. You can print in plastic, you can print in metal, you can print in glass. They use different technologies, but effectively they're doing the same thing. They're fabricating very detailed work very often and producing items that are quite extraordinary, including food. If you can fabricate a human kidney, you can fabricate a steak. And as the world loses 40% of its food in the distribution process, this may be a fabulous way of delivering edible food at the point of need in every house in the world. So maybe we'll all have a 3D printer in our home, printing out your food as you're on the way home. You've dialed into it on the train, and it's getting ready for you when you get home. And if you don't like it, you can delete it and maybe reuse it. Who knows? But who's got a 3D printer at home? That's going to change. Okay. That top right hand is a 3D printer. Amazing. If you think about convenience, there is nothing more convenient than the thing you bought being printed in your home. If you want the repair economy, we want to start reusing things better, what better than to have a component printed in your home for use in any of your products or in your home? These sort of things are beginning to happen. So that's a little bit about 3D printing. I'm not going to go into it forever. Then you've got unmanned autonomous vehicles, which I think are really interesting. Japan's had farmers using remote control helicopters for a long time doing spraying. We've now got Vultra tractor factory launching slave tractors to follow the master tractor around. So you have one driver, 3 or 4 units around fields. Obviously, you've got all of the hype coming out of people like Amazon Prime and others talking about delivering books and products and services and pizzas using octocopters and the such like, which is beginning to happen. Who's got an octocopter at home? Who's got a drone? This is a technology conference, isn't it? Okay, well, we got one of those as well. Unbelievable. Going to change what we do and how we do it. Realtors, if you're American, or real estate folk are using it to map buildings and take images. Claims adjusters are using it to get to difficult places, to view the problem. You've now got people looking at parts of the world that suffer from heavy monsoon, when the roads get washed away, using it as a distribution system, as a normal part of distribution system. And you've also got a very recent acquisition by one of the large technology players of a hybrid atmospheric glider that's piloted by solar power on the wings, and it's a pretty large beast, and it'll act as a satellite device living in the atmosphere above commercial flight level, and they can stay in the air for 5 years at a time. So these things can get up there very quickly, stay up there for 5 years. They go 65 miles an hour, which is fast enough to counteract the effects of the speed of the Earth turning and our geostationary satellites. So we can spread mobile internet access to the world unbelievably quickly using these devices, and we will. So, and of course, the opportunity is, of course, increasingly we won't bother own cars, we'll whistle one up when we want one, it'll drive itself to us, pick us up, take us where we want to go, and go off and do something else. Because why not? And we can have different vehicles at different times that do different things, and we don't have to worry about it. And how do we ensure that? Who is the insured? How does the partnership work? Is it like hire cars? Is that the sort of arrangement? So it's going to be really interesting how we have to morph for a world where we're automating more of the transport systems that we're going to use as we go forward. So, and here we have another image of a hologram. The one on your right is the hologram. The one on the left is the real person. They're colour, they're interactive. They can be as many places as you want. So if you want to be omnipresent, and sometimes you feel you haven't got enough time to get things done in the day, you need one of these. So you can run around the world being you somewhere else. Slightly flippant. Or you can hire one of these at $5,000 US a week, or you can buy her outright for $250,000, and you can program her to do what you would have done. So the clerical things, the functional things, she uses eye contact and speaks 4 languages and recognizes tone of voice change, and you can program her to do a lot of the clerical functional tasks, the human engagement tasks that you perhaps might have done or have people doing. Or you can invent a slightly prettier version or in that version or that. So you can muddle up all sorts of issues of personality and cult of celebrity with your technology. Now, this is the sort of technology that CIO is going to have to deal with. Now, does this appeal more to the CMO or the CIO? It's a really interesting discussion about where does this sort of technology fit. Because in terms of a distribution vehicle, this is a brilliant idea, unless someone steals your robot. And that's going to be slightly annoying, because it tends not to happen too much with your staff. But the nice thing about all this tech is that what we normally do with technology is make it do what we've always done. Yeah? So a lot of people have PCs in their companies, then replace them with laptops. Is that pretty common? And then we still make people come in 9 to 5 and sit at their desk. Why? Why are we doing that? And we're still doing that in many places. You know, we've got internet, we've got remote access. Why don't we let people be wherever they want to be? So eventually, with all technology, we do things differently to start with, but then ultimately we do different things completely. And this is the trick with technology. If we can look over the horizon and just see the real impact, we can see what's coming. And a lot of CIOs struggle with all of that. Outside players are coming in even faster than we can shout at. We've got Walmart with their pharmaceutical offers and Google insurance in one way or the other. So there are players coming in from outside. We've got global insurers being formed from regional and remote insurers. So eventually reintroducing themselves into the developed markets. We've got the old inside-out view of us pilot high, develop the product, sell it on, to an outside-in. How do we help customers protect their lives and the things they want protecting without bombarding them with different products in silos and expecting them to make decisions at each product level. So we need to change the whole orientation around the consumer. And that leads us to a combination of all these things, moving from a structured, tactical product sales to unstructured managers, making strategic decisions and moving to a preventative model with our customers and clients. And this is really quite exciting because then we actually get loved. So it's a really, really exciting potential is to be much more proactive on a regular basis, interacting with our clients, with more contact, helping them do things differently. Having said that, at the same time, if you ask consumers if they want their information to be shared, the answer is no, and are very uncomfortable with it by and large. And yet most insurers in the United States are committed to predictive modeling, which requires a huge amount of data, not just of that person from the industry, but everything else that person does in their life to get a rich picture for decision making. So of that rich picture, increasingly we can say to individuals, we will price and sell you your product targeted around your specific needs because the technology will allow us to do it. Today it's very difficult. We've got regulatory barriers, we've got operational barriers, we've got system barriers, but increasingly customers will want highly personalized products that are priced and adapted to their lifestyles and preferences and pocketbook size, and we're going to have to change how we deliver those products. Crop insurance is a great example from these folk at Climate Corporation. They came out of Google. They'll basically insure your field for an event, and if the event happens, you get paid. There is no claim in the process. They've removed that part of it. If the hailstorm comes, that was one of the perils that you were covered for in that time period, in that location, you get sent a check. So dynamics are changing from the supplier having all the power, if you like, to the customer even having systems that will tell them when it is best to buy from you. And this becomes even more interesting when the consumer has better technology than the supplier. And in very many cases, that's true, isn't it? That we tend to go home to use the smart tech and not necessarily go to work, which used to be the case a few years ago. So threat of substitutes, I've talked about briefly, new entrants coming all around the world or other markets, and the bargaining power. So increasingly, customers want more and more contact and engagement with their suppliers if they're going to have any sort of reasonable attitude towards them. And of course, we get all of our feedback from our peers around us, and that's going to increase over time as people don't want to know what you think about your products. We only want to know what other people think about your service and products. How many of you have feedback systems on your websites from your customers that new customers can look at? One. Anybody else? One? One. Okay, talk to this lady down here, because this is what people want to see. If I go and look on TripAdvisor, and there's a whole load more I want to say here, I'm going to run out of time. On TripAdvisor, if the hotel tells me they're lovely and shows me their pictures, what do I do next? Book it. Yeah, that's probably what we do. Or we look at the user pictures, or we look at the user references, or we look at the score. You know, we've noticed that little score on TripAdvisor, and that has a huge impact these days, and we don't know any of those people. They could all be lying. But we take a lot of notice of peers about what they think about us. And yet still service is the number one. No matter what you do, it's still about meeting the need in a timely fashion, in a way that that customer expects from your brand in that channel. And I love this picture. I just think that's exactly what I would do if I've been sitting in that fast food restaurant waiting 30 minutes. I think that's terrific. Okay, now a lot of execs are struggling with this. Really trying to understand how consumers are changing is one of the biggest challenges that we all face. And not many execs think their companies are very good at being innovators. So, work is changing. It's increasingly globalized. I've mentioned before that technology is increasingly replacing manual, clerical, managerial, and professional work, and value is shifting to outside enterprises. Social networks aren't about marketing, as I mentioned earlier on, or about customer services. They're actually about changing the way we run the company. So it is all about how do we collaborate around issues that we need to resolve, problems that we need to solve, projects that we need to run to deliver a better and more functional company. And ultimately, we need to do things differently. And I'm going to spend just 2 minutes, if I may. I only got a few seconds here. But effectively, the way we do things is going to change. As I mentioned, claim is going to be from a claim, one-off engagement with a client and customer, to a prevention engagement relationship. And we need to think differently about how we're organized, how we're structured, the culture we have inside to adopt new ways of working, and increasingly collaborating with new partners so that we become a richer proposition. And management has a way of saying this is the right way of doing things. And that's fine, that's brilliant in terms of delivering a reliable customer service outcome And it's a terrific way of running a company. But if you want change, as Kotte here says, who's Harvard, you need to have more leadership. And I know we try and interchange those terms, but they're not truly interchangeable. If we manage things, which is a brilliant thing to do, by the way, that's great. That drives out the margin and the productivity. If you want to lead to change, we need to be going somewhere different. And that's the uncomfortable bit. And if you think about the way the world is, we tend to think about today, which takes all of our time, yeah? And then there's the future. And we don't spend much time on the future. What we decided to do was divide it up a bit and say there's today, and there's tomorrow, and then there's the future. And that may not seem important, but it is important if you think we have managers who drive out the business today. We have leaders who take us to the sunlit uplands of our new vision for our department or our function or our division or our company. And we have entrepreneurs who are thinking about that over there, out there, technology or out there business model that's forming. And they are the ones who will be the headlights for you inside your firms. And I promise to only be 1 minute if I'm given it. This is the tool I gave you guys. If you want to go online and do it, it'll tell you where you sit as a manager, a leader, an entrepreneur. There are no right answers. Companies should be full of managers. I know that sounds like a pejorative term, but it isn't. Most of us are managers of our businesses. Some of us lead it to new places, and others are the wacky thinkers. And that's the order we need to think about people. And if essentially managers think much more about resources and capability and business and product and economic cycles and communicate that well. And that's the world of managing a company. And that's brilliant. The leader tends to be all about new behaviors and what foresight or insight is giving us the ideas that we need to camp on to move the organization forward, and what culture are we relying on that allows those behaviors. And a leader will just communicate and communicate and communicate where you're going to and how we're going to get there and how we're going to resolve the problems and what it'll be like when we get there. And that's what the leader does. The entrepreneur is the annoying person in the organization that keeps adding an extra column to the spreadsheet. They're the person that says, why don't we work in 5 or 6 week cycles, not 4? They're the person who says, why don't we blend 2 products together and sell them together? They're people always thinking differently. Normally, either they leave or you sack them. Because generally they're annoying. But occasionally, if you write in their HR file while you're keeping them, they know your culture, they know your values, they know your financial circumstances, they know your goals and aspirations, and they can be the headlights of your firm. So they are quite useful people to have around the place if you want to look ahead and think what's coming. And this is my last slide, I promise. I'm 3 minutes over. But the point I wanted to bring to you is that the makeup of the people who did the questionnaire so far is this, in this audience. And what that is a profile actually of is a leader. It's biased towards management, which is nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly good. And you would expect at a conference like this that you would have a leader profile. So the majority of people here are either leader managers or leader entrepreneurs, which means they are biased towards leadership and thinking about what's coming next. And they come to conferences like this to hear from Fineos about what's coming next in their world, to hear from people like me in terms of what may be coming next. And that's a leader profile, and that's a great profile to have as well. But so is the manager, and so is the entrepreneur. And what we don't have an awful lot of is the entrepreneur, pure entrepreneur. In fact, there's none. And there's no pure leaders or pure managers either, for that matter. So it's an interesting little exercise to do. And what's more interesting is when you do that with your colleagues, if you're brave enough, when you get back, and have a discussion about where you fit in the team and who are the people who need to be in the room when you're being innovative, and who are the people that need to be in the room when you're implementing your change, as opposed to rediscovering yet another thing you might do. So there we are. That's some thoughts. Managers are brilliant at managing things. Leaders are great at people, at communication, and entrepreneurs are brilliant at ideas and strong on vision. And these are the sort of folk we need to have around us when we're planning change for the future. So if things seem under control, you're just not going fast enough. Thank you very much.